The sign went up on a Tuesday morning. Facility closed by order of First National Bank. No warning, no phone calls, just a chain-link fence and a padlock on the gate where Riverside Grain Elevator had operated since 1947. Tom Brenner saw it driving past on his way to check the south field. He pulled over, got out, walked up to the fence. The elevator towers stood silent. The scales were empty. The office windows were dark. 20 trucks used to line up here during harvest. Now there was just gravel and a notice taped to the fence explaining that the facility's operating company had defaulted on agricultural development loans totaling $847,000. The bank had seized the assets. The elevator was closed indefinitely. Tom stood there doing math he didn't want to do. He had 3,200 bushels of soybeans in his bins at home. Another harvest coming in 6 weeks. Grain prices had been falling since March. He'd planned to sell when harvest started, use that cash to make his quarterly land payment, cover the seed loan, buy diesel for spring planting. That plan required a buyer. Riverside had been that buyer for 31 years. Now it was a locked gate and a bank notice. He drove home slowly, thinking about logistics he'd never had to think about before. The next closest elevator was Hendricks Grain, 43 miles north. After that, Morrison Feed and Seed, 51 miles east. Both were over an hour away. Both charged the same price per bushel, minus a transport fee if you couldn't deliver yourself. Transport fee. That was the problem. Most farmers didn't haul their own grain anymore. You grew it, you stored it temporarily, you called the elevator, they sent trucks. The elevator bought it, stored it in their facility, sold it to processors or exporters when prices moved. That's how the system worked. Centralized, efficient, dependent on the elevator staying open. Tom's quarterly payment was due in 42 days. His grain was worth roughly $11,200 at current prices. His payment was $8,900. That margin wasn't comfortable, but it was workable, if he could sell the grain. He called Hendricks Grain that afternoon. They were buying, but they were also overwhelmed. Riverside's closure had pushed every farmer in a 3-county area toward the remaining elevators. Hendricks had a 2-week wait for their trucks. Morrison was running 3 weeks out. Neither facility could prioritize him. He'd have to wait his turn. Tom asked about delivering himself. Hendricks said sure, if he could haul it. They'd take delivery any time during business hours, no transport fee if he brought it himself. That night, Tom sat at the kitchen table with his wife Linda, running numbers on a legal pad. The grain was in bins behind the barn. The nearest elevator was 43 miles. A full load of soybeans weighed about 25,000 pounds. That required a commercial grain truck, not a pickup. Linda looked at the numbers. "We don't have a grain truck." Tom didn't answer right away. Then he said, "We do. It's behind the equipment shed." She knew what he meant. The old International Harvester flatbed, 1978 model, the one his father had used before the elevators started sending their own trucks. It had been parked for 6 years, maybe 7. Tom had kept it serviced out of habit, changed the oil once a year, ran the engine every few months to keep the seals from drying out. But he hadn't hauled grain with it since 1978. "Does it run?" Linda asked. "Last time I checked." "When was that?" "March." She looked at him. "That was 4 months ago." It ran fine in March. The math was straightforward but not encouraging. Diesel was $1, 14 per gallon. The truck got roughly 6 miles per gallon loaded. 43 miles to Hendricks meant 7. 2 gallons one way. Round trip about 14. 5 gallons. That was 16. 53 in fuel per trip. The truck could haul approximately 450 bushels per load. At current soybean prices, $3. 48 per bushel, that was $1,560 per load. Minus fuel, $549. 47 net. It would take 8 loads to move all 3,200 bushels. 8 round trips, 688 miles total, 132s. 24 in fuel costs, if the truck didn't break down, if grain prices didn't drop further, if Hendricks kept buying. Tom walked out to the equipment shed the next morning. The truck sat where it always sat, under a tarp, behind the old disc harrow. The paint was faded, more rust than red. The tires were flat. The bed had a dent from where he'd backed into a gate post in 1976. He pulled the tarp off. Dust everywhere, bird droppings on the hood. The windshield had a crack running corner to corner. He climbed into the cab. The seat springs poked through the vinyl. The steering wheel was sun-cracked. He turned the key. Nothing. The battery was dead. He'd expected that. He jumped the battery from his tractor. The engine turned over twice, coughed, died. He tried again. This time it caught. Black smoke poured from the exhaust, then cleared. The engine ran rough for 30 seconds, smoothed out, settled into a low idle. Tom sat there listening to it. The engine sounded fine. The transmission shifted. The brakes needed bleeding, but they held pressure. The lights worked. The hydraulics for the dump bed cycled properly. It was a working truck. The question was whether it would stay a working truck for 688 miles. He spent 2 days getting it road-ready. New battery. Aired up the tires, changed the oil and filters, bled the brakes, checked the U-joints, tightened the bed bolts, replaced 2 frayed belts, tested the lights, the horn, the emergency flashers. The truck wasn't pretty, but it was functional. On Thursday morning, he backed it up to the grain bin. The auger system still worked. It took 40 minutes to load 450 bushels into the truck bed. He tied down the tarp, checked the straps, checked them again. Linda came out as he was finishing. "You're really doing this?" "I don't have another option." "What if it breaks down?" "Then I fix it on the side of the road." She didn't argue. The numbers were clear. No grain sale meant no payment. No payment meant the bank started asking questions they couldn't afford to answer. Tom climbed into the cab. The engine started immediately this time. He pulled out of the driveway at 6:47 a.m., headed north on County Road 18. The truck ran fine for the first 20 miles. The engine held steady. The temperature gauge stayed normal. The load rode stable. Then, just past the miller's place, the engine started knocking. Not loud, just a rhythmic tick-tick-tick that hadn't been there before. Tom kept driving. The knock didn't get worse. The engine didn't overheat. He watched the oil pressure gauge. It stayed in the normal range. 31 miles in, he hit construction. State highway resurfacing project. Single lane, 15-minute delays. He sat there idling, burning fuel, watching cars pass in the opposite lane. The fuel gauge dropped slowly. The clock kept moving. He reached Hendricks Grain at 9:23 a.m. 3 trucks were ahead of him at the scale. He waited his turn. When the scale was clear, he pulled forward. The operator came out, checked his load, printed a ticket. "First time I've seen you here," the operator said. "Riverside closed." "I know. You're the 4th guy this week, hauling his own grain." Tom took the ticket, pulled forward to the unloading pit. He raised the bed. The soybeans poured out, 450 bushels in 90 seconds. The pit auger carried them up into the storage facility. The operator came back with a payment slip. "You want a check or you want it on account?" "Check." The operator printed it. 1,566 euros. Tom folded it, put it in his shirt pocket. The return trip was faster. No load, no construction delays. He made it home by 12:40 p.m. Total time, 5 hours, 53 minutes. Total fuel cost, 16 tons, 53. Net income, 1,549.47. 7 more loads to go. He made the second trip Friday. Same route, same process. This time the truck threw a belt 10 miles from Hendricks. Tom pulled over, replaced it with the spare he'd brought, kept driving. Total delay, 18 minutes. The third trip was Monday. No mechanical issues. Traffic was heavier. He made it to Hendricks by 10:15 a.m., back home by 2:30 p.m. By Wednesday, he'd moved 1,800 bushels. He'd made 5,640 A's. 41 after fuel costs. His payment was due in 31 days. Then the grain price dropped. It wasn't a crash, just an adjustment. Soybeans fell from $3.48 to $3.31 per bushel. The radio said it was seasonal pressure, harvest volumes increasing, export demand softening. The explanation didn't matter. The math changed. At $3.31 per bushel, his remaining 1,400 bushels were worth $4,134, not $4,172. His margin had just shrunk by 238. Tom did the calculation. Total grain value, 10,282s. 41. Total fuel costs if he finished hauling, 132s. 24. Net proceeds, 10,150. 17. His payment was $8,900. That left 1,250. $17 for seed, for diesel, for repairs, for everything else until next harvest. The margin was getting thin. He called Hendricks Thursday morning to check their buy price. Still $3.31 ton. He asked if they expected it to go back up. The buyer said maybe, but probably not until spring. Supply was heavy. The market was oversupplied. Tom hung up, looked at the grain bins. The grain didn't care about market conditions. It just sat there, inventory without liquidity, an asset he couldn't spend. He made the fourth trip Thursday afternoon. The truck ran fine. No issues. He was getting efficient at the process now. Load time down to 35 minutes. Drive time consistent. Unloading smooth. But efficiency didn't change the price per bushel. Friday morning, the fuel station raised diesel prices. Not a huge jump, just 9 cents, but 9 cents per gallon times 14. 5 gallons per trip meant his fuel cost per load went from $16.53 to $17.84. His margin kept shrinking. He made the fifth trip Saturday. The truck was holding up better than he'd expected. The engine knock had stabilized, not gotten worse. The transmission shifted cleanly. The brakes were solid. The truck wasn't pretty, but it was working. On Sunday, he serviced it, changed the oil again, checked the brake fluid, tightened loose bolts, greased the fifth wheel. The truck needed attention, but it was manageable attention. He could do the work himself. Monday, sixth trip. The sky looked like rain. Tom loaded fast, drove faster. He made it to Hendricks before the weather hit. The operator said they'd had 12 farmers hauling their own grain in the past week. Riverside's closure had forced everyone to adapt. Tom asked if any other elevators had closed. The operator said not yet, but there were rumors. Banks were calling loans all over the state. Interest rates were high, commodity prices were low, and agricultural lending was turning toxic. "You think Hendricks will stay open?" Tom asked. The operator shrugged. "We're not as leveraged as Riverside was. But who knows? Market's rough right now." Tom drove home thinking about what happens when the second closest elevator closes, then the third. Eventually you run out of buyers within driving distance. Eventually the fuel cost exceeds the grain value. Eventually liquidity disappears completely. He made the seventh trip Wednesday. 2 loads left. His payment was due in 18 days. He had 9,583.88 orders in grain sales. After the final 2 loads, he'd have approximately $13,100. Minus the payment, that left $4,200 for operating costs until next harvest. It wasn't comfortable, but it was survival. Thursday morning, the truck wouldn't start. Tom turned the key. The engine cranked but didn't catch. He tried again. Same result. He checked the fuel. Tank was full. He checked the battery. Voltage was good. Ignition problem maybe. Or fuel pump. He spent 3 hours diagnosing it. The fuel pump was working. The ignition timing was fine. Finally, he pulled the air filter. It was clogged solid, completely blocked. The engine had been starving for air. He replaced the filter. The engine started immediately. He loaded the 7th load, headed north. The truck ran better with the new filter, smoother, more responsive. He should have checked it earlier, but mechanical problems don't follow convenient schedules. He delivered the load, got the check, drove home. 1 load left. Friday morning, he loaded the last 450 bushels. This was it, the final trip. After this, his grain was sold, his payment was covered, and he'd have operating capital until spring. The drive to Hendricks was routine. No construction, no traffic, no mechanical problems. He pulled onto the scale at 9:47 a.m. The operator printed the ticket. Tom raised the bed. The last of his soybeans poured into the pit. The operator handed him the final check, $1,289.50. Grain prices had dropped again, down to $3.31. Tom folded the check, put it with the others. He'd moved 3,200 bushels over 8 trips, 688 miles, 17 days. He'd grossed $10,772, $50, minus $143, $72 in fuel. His net was $10,628. 78. His land payment was $8,900. That left $1,728. 78. He drove home with an empty truck bed and a thin margin. The truck had worked. The plan had worked. He'd converted grain to cash without waiting 3 weeks for an elevator's truck schedule. But the victory didn't feel victorious. It felt like math that barely added up. At home, Linda asked how it went. Tom told her. She looked at the numbers. That's not much cushion. I know. What about next harvest? Tom didn't have an answer. Next harvest would bring the same problem. Grain without a local buyer. Transportation costs eating margin. Prices subject to forces he couldn't control. The old truck sat in the driveway, scratched and dented and functional. It had hauled 25,000 pounds 8 times without major failure. The engine still ran, the transmission still shifted. It was a working truck that had worked when he needed it to work. But working wasn't the same as profitable. Working was just the minimum requirement for survival. That night Tom sat at the kitchen table looking at the final numbers. He'd made his payment, he had operating capital, the farm would continue for another season. But the margin between continuing and failing was 688 miles in a 46-year-old truck. He thought about the farmers who didn't have old trucks, the ones waiting 3 weeks for elevator transportation, the ones watching grain sit while prices fell and payments came due. Production without transportation was just inventory. Inventory without liquidity was just weight. The truck had given him liquidity, not because it was fast or efficient or modern, just because it ran when the system failed. The bank had shut down the elevator, the grain had been ready, the truck had still worked. That difference had been worth 1,128. 78. It wasn't wealth, it wasn't security. It was just enough distance between survival and foreclosure to keep farming. Tom folded the payment slip, put it in the desk drawer. Next harvest was 7 months away. The truck was parked outside, the grain bins were empty. The bank was satisfied for another quarter. This was winning in 1984. This was what victory looked like when the system failed. If stories about transportation and leverage matter to you, subscribe. Because sometimes survival isn't about producing more, it's about reaching the market when the market stops coming to you.